Hello there, very good evening and welcome to this special program this evening at the Crossroads, where we discuss where Guyana stands with regards to elections 2020. I'm joined this evening by some distinguished gentlemen. I have with me in the via Zoom rather, um, Mr. Kit Nascimento, a former minister in the government under the Forbes Burnham administration. I also have with me Peter Wickham, a political consultant based in Barbados, who would have worked in Guyana on many occasions in the past. We also have Mr. Christopher Ram, a chartered accountant, attorney at law, and a political commentator. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the program. I think Mr. Ram's video is muted.
No.
He certainly is going to join us in just a bit. Peter, good evening and welcome in. We finally got this
I
got this
think
one in.
I think so. Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you with me this evening to discuss this extremely important situation in our country. We are at a critical juncture in our history as a country. Guyanese would have voted on March 2nd. We're way over 4 months. We're in our fifth month, and the Guyanese people are still to see the government that they voted to elect assume office so that the country can move forward. I want to start first and foremost with asking you your initial thoughts on elections 2020 and how we got to this point where we are, maybe with the longest running election, if not in this hemisphere, maybe in the world. I'll start with you, Mr. Ram, and then I'll go to Mr. Nascimento and, of course, Peter Wickham.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks very much, Mr. Moderator, for having me. When we think of the elections 2020, we have to go back about a year with the no confidence motion. President Granger announced that he would abide by the vote in Parliament, and then he went and told his people, "You elected me for 5 years, and I'll be there for 5 years." So he went to the polls on March the 20th after all kinds of legal games played in the domestic courts and as well as our highest apex court, the Caribbean Court of Justice. This was all after all kinds of machinations with respect to the appointment of a chairperson and his ignoring a whole set of people, including myself, but that's immaterial, that's purely for disclosure. And so it took quite some time for us to get here. What I think we are facing is the reality that you have a government that has lost the elections beyond any shadow of a doubt and is determined, come what may, not to concede power. So you've had Granger making various statements. He had said, look, he'll abide by any decisions or declaration made by the chairwoman of GCOM. Then yesterday, his position changed. He will accept any declaration provided it is within the law. Now, Granger has already challenged the Chief Justice in an earlier matter when he described the views of the ruling of a Chief Justice as her views, and he has his views. So what we're facing with really is, I think you have an electoral coup by a government that feels it has all the coercive arms of the state behind it, and it is prepared to challenge one and all inside Guyana and outside Guyana. Literally, it is challenging the entire world, maybe apart from China and Russia. We haven't heard them say anything. So quite frankly, where this is going to go is still a matter of uncertainty. We think we know where it should go. Rule of law, constitution, Granger should take his exit. We're not sure he's going to do that.
Mr. Ram, thank you very much. Mr. Nascimento, I bring you in here now. Your thoughts.
Eddie, thank you for inviting me to be on this program amongst these very distinguished gentlemen. I'd like to begin on March the 2nd, when we had the election. It's important to remind ourselves that we had an efficient, a relatively well-run election. It was observed by a variety of international organizations, very credible ones, including at that time the Carter Center, and by a number of local observer organizations, such as the Private Sector Commission. I was one of those observers. I was an accredited observer from the time the election began to the time that the recount was concluded. We all saw, and was internationally recognized, that the elections on March the 2nd were properly and credibly conducted, in fact, quite efficiently. All of the parties contesting that election, certainly the major ones, and certainly the larger observer groups, by the morning of March the 3rd, had statements of poll which were public documents in their hands, and they knew the results. APNU, AFC, by the morning of March the 3rd, knew perfectly well that they had lost the election. And so did the rest of us, who had possessions of the statements of poll. That is why what we know happened as the next day after the elections progressed. That is why Mr. Mingo, directed by Lowenfield and others in GCOM, began the process of virtually rigging the count in Region 4, because they knew that they had lost and they had no intention of being defeated. That is where all of this began. We know what has happened since then. We need not go over it, other than to say that when we finally concluded a recount, the recount figures straight out of the ballot box. Let me remind our listeners, we were not counting a set of documents. We were counting each ballot taken out of each box, counted in the presence of every contesting parties, counted in the presence of every observer, counted in the presence of cameras. And those returns from the recount matched almost exactly the statements of poll from the elections. There can be no doubt who won and who lost this elections. And that is what we must recognize. The world has certainly recognized it. But from the morning of March the 3rd, it became obvious that Mr. Granger and those around him were not prepared to concede the results of a democratically held election. I speak from personal observation. I watched in horror as the day progressed after Election Day and the days that progressed after that, I watched in horror as Mr. Mengo substituted false figures in place of the figures on the SOPs. I sat amongst the international observers. I had at one stage the American ambassador on one side of me and the British High Commissioner on the other side. So I do not speak of what I've heard. I speak of what I saw. And I saw an ugly, naked, bizarre attempt to manipulate the returns of Region 4 and ultimately have those manipulated figures adopted and embraced by the chief elections officer himself. And now, at this stage, presenting them once again before DCOM as the results that we are expected to accept.
Mr. Nascimento, I thank you for your opening comments. Peter, I bring you in here. You're an observer from the outside, a true observer based in Barbados, but you've been following elections around the Caribbean, and I suspect wider afield. And you have been following the Guyana elections, I think, from the very leading up to the elections until now. Your thoughts of what has happened so far?
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with everything the gentlemen have been saying in terms of the chronology. And I mean, frankly, I was appalled. I have not seen, I've been in this business for about 20 years, and I have not seen anything like it. You know, I always argued that there are ways and means you can, you know, put your hand on the scales in terms of an election. But something like this was unlikely to happen, largely because it is so difficult to hide and do it. You know, you're in an environment where there is cell phones and video cameras, and there's so much transparency. It would have been difficult to pull this off. Nonetheless, it was done. It's against that background that I have been arguing that I think that if we see this as a situation where we are arguing good from bad, right from wrong, and we believe that we can win an argument regarding whether there is a right and a wrong here, and we can win the argument on the side of right, and that the persons who have been proven wrong will stand down. I think that we're on the wrong course. While I don't disagree with anything I've heard from Mr. Nascimento or Mr. Ram, my sense is that we have now come to a point where we have to start to look at issues of strategy and how do we get out of it. And it's against that background that I've been saying that we need to compare what is happening now to a coup. And it's no different to the coup that took place in Grenada in the 1970s or the coup that took place in Trinidad and Tobago in the 1990s, where someone decides that they are going to take obvious and brazen action, and essentially they're going to hijack a nation overnight and essentially hold it at bay. These guys have held Guyana in suspense for over 100 days. And I predicted when the last set of action had completed and that we were told that the matter had been settled at the CCJ, that there was going to be another set of legal action, and it has now started. Her ladyship, Chief Justice Roxanne George, is saying that she expects that she will get a ruling by Sunday. I'm pretty convinced that based on that ruling, we will have an appeal on that ruling by Monday, assuming that the first ruling doesn't go the way that the APNU expects it to go. So you can have an appeal that can take you into the next week. And then, of course, that appeal can go to the CCJ because this is not an election matter. It is an appealable issue. When it gets to the CCJ, then you will have a third week. We're now in July. I am convinced that if we get to the end of July, then we can have another raft of appeals, because bear in mind, Mingo and Lowenfield have not really appealed in their own name yet. They have not applied to the court in their own name yet. So there is certain legal protection that they believe that their office affords them. So then that process can start. We could very well be here in September, going through appeals and going through a process that has ultimately been hijacked by these two individuals. And I feel that the time has come where there needs to be some kind of diplomatic back channel that establishes what exactly these guys want, and see if they can be given some level of relief. Right now, it's a zero-sum game. They either win or they lose. If they lose everything. Two of them will probably be locked up. If they win, then everything is fine. The challenge is that a zero-sum game doesn't give you the opportunity to negotiate, and there has to be some kind of a negotiating basis to get these guys to move on this issue. I am thoroughly convinced in my mind that they know that what they're doing is wrong. I listen to the point now where President Granger, when he speaks, he doesn't speak with passion. He generally is not a passionate person anyhow, but even less so now. So he is speaking as though someone has given him a script to read and he reads it. I mean, how can you take the ruling of the CCJ, which in my opinion is one of the most clear and pellucid statements I have heard regarding the way that elections should be run. And in the wake of that, I was saying I was happy that this matter came forward because it clarified the role of an election officer, the role, what exactly is a valid vote. Everything was clearly defined. And they have been clear in saying that they want the valid votes as reflected in the recount to be used as a basis to do a tabulation. And then what do you have? You have a president of Guyana who's an intelligent individual suggesting that what they have done is they have set aside the recount. And I'm saying, but where do you get this information from? And the point is that once you are seized with this opinion, once you have the capacity of senior counsel to go before the local judge and to argue these points, what you do is you win time. I mean, you may lose a case, but ultimately you will win sufficient time. And ultimately, the longer you hold this situation at bay, the longer you frustrate the will of people. And if you look at what they were looking to do with the recount, they wanted to do a recount that ran 365 days because it's about frustration. And ultimately, they're frustrating you with the courts. So this is where I am now. This is unprecedented. This is appalling. I mean, everything that Dr. Gonzalez has said today is correct. I think that it is shameful, quite frankly. I am surprised and disturbed that someone who rose to the level of president of Guyana would want to embroil himself in this nonsense. But ultimately, it is what it is. And I feel that the point has come now where we need to start asking ourselves, what kind of diplomatic back channel can be established to sit with these guys and say, look, how can we end this matter and how can we end this matter this week? It does not have to wait for her ladyship to come back with a judgment because ultimately if there's a declaration tomorrow and if there's a concession tomorrow, then the matter is over and there's no need for court action. So this is where I am on the issue of this thing.
Thanks, Peter. As we go along, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the actions that could be taken and some that have already been taken. But I want us to spend a few minutes to examine the narratives that are being peddled. And if one is to go, you can go as far back as December 21st, 2018. And Mr. Nascimento, you alluded to the fact that, or is it Mr. Ram, I think, alluded to the fact that what was said on the evening by Mr. Nagamutu, the evening of December 21st, what was said by the president on the morning of the 22nd, and how that changed over the course of more than a year. The other issue is since the elections, we've been hearing on the evening of, the following morning of the vote, we've heard people like Bassett Williams and the others saying the elections were free and fair. They held out on the bingo numbers. When they were forced into a recount, then you start hearing about irregularities and electoral fraud without any evidence being provided. And the sum total of all of this, though, is this being used as a tool to mislead supporters? Because when you watch what is happening on the ground, a lot of supporters are getting carried away and believing somehow that you actually won the elections. Mr. Ram, I'll start with you. Mr. Ram, you're muted. Yes, go ahead.
Can I take up what Peter was saying about diplomatic back channels?
Go straight ahead.
Let's not forget that 5 Caribbean leaders came to Guyana. The result of the initiative was to have a recount, to which President Granger, Bharat Jagdeo, and the Secretary General of the CARICOM Secretariat all signed on. What you have is a situation where Granger can no longer be trusted because he doesn't honor his word. And, you know, it's sad to say that, and today's his birthday. That's my information. And it's really sad for us to say that about our president. We should also bear in mind, in terms of this diplomatic back channel, we had a CARICOM heads meeting virtual recently. President Granger chose not to participate, not even to send a message. Now, it does not appear to me that he's playing by any rules of normal, decent, honorable conduct. And, you know, he invites the kind of description that Barbadian diplomat said of him. So I'm not sure that there's a lot of room. Yes, we always have to talk. But how do you talk with someone who cannot be trusted, for one thing, and who refuses to play by any game, who essentially says, I am not moving, you try moving me. Let's bear in mind, Mr. Moderator, that only a couple of days ago, the president did a lot of changes in the upper hierarchy of the military. Now, that's not the kind of thing that a lame duck president, certainly one who has lost the elections, would be doing. So you really have to wonder what is his motive. Yes, it is right, we have to talk, but let's talk about settling this issue of the elections to start with, unless we can deal with that. And, you know, we talk a lot about power sharing and all form. That deserves a separate discussion. But we have serious power share. We do have power sharing built into our constitution and in our system. We have 10 regions. They all have their own elections, the regional councils and so on. We have monies being allocated. We have constitutional commissions. We have such a panoply of instruments. And I think it's sad when we talk about power sharing, we seem to talk about executive power sharing. We can't even agree on a recount. And you're going to agree on how to run a country? I don't see that happening in 1,000 days.
May I have your permission?
Yes, go straight ahead, Mr. Nasmith.
To address what Peter had to say. Because I believe Peter is extremely well-intentioned, and Peter recognizes the facts that have occurred. But Peter, you cannot negotiate with a criminal. And it is not what the Granger government and the group around him want. It is what they intend. They intend to remain in power. You came close when you said that we are dealing with a coup. The reason that the Granger government, I will call him that for the time being, is still in place is because they have the security forces behind them. We are not altogether different from what is happening in Venezuela. So long as the police and the Guyana Defense Force remain in support of Granger, he remains there in office. And you are absolutely right, Peter. They will abuse the court system from now until doomsday. They have every intention of doing that. And in fact, all of this that is appearing before the courts is absolute foolishness. But the system allows constant appeals until, no doubt, the CCJ will get fed up with it and refuse to hear it. I hope that if this particular case arrives there, that is what they do. And they must go further. They must issue specific orders, which they have so far failed to do. The CCJ at this stage, when it gets there, needs to direct through orders that Granger and his company must debate office and recognize the election results, recognize the recount results. And then they are, in fact, criminals. But negotiate, Peter? Negotiate with those people? You have to be kidding.
Yeah.
Listen, Peter Granger
Don't comment us now, Peter. I know you want to add something.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of things that Kit said.
Just the last minute.
Granger negotiated the recount. That was an agreement he entered into. Granger said that he was not interfering with GCOM, yet he directs GCOM that they must accept Lowenfield's report. Granger says that he would accept what the chairman of GCOM has ruled. She has already ruled that Lowenfield's report goes out of the window and we move to accept recount. Granger has absolute criminal intent. And that is why we have to rely on not a back channel diplomatic arrangement, but a frontal.
Mr. Wickham,
a frontal punishment of every one of them, which is now beginning to happen.
I'll bring you in here now, Peter. I know you wanted to add something to what you said earlier.
Right. No, I mean, I firstly let me make it clear to these gentlemen. Don't see me as the enemy in all of this, because I am pretty much reflecting the view that you guys are reflecting. It's just that I am in a situation where I'm saying, let me see what I can add to the conversation, and I'm trying to add a direction that is not yet on the table. A couple of things. Kit, you referred to the CCJ. Honestly, I do not think the CCJ has the legal capacity to make orders. Indeed, if they could have, they would have. And when I read the Chief Justice's, the CCJ, President of the CCJ's views, it was clear that he did not think he had jurisdiction to decide on an electoral matter. He was able to dispose of the previous report because that report was pursuant to something which was illegal in the first place. He decided on the jurisdictional matter, which he says that he believes that they have the authority so to do. But the court that deals with election matters is the Guyana Appeal Court. And I would hazard to suggest that you guys are not going to get very far with the Guyana Appeal Court based on history. So I don't really know that the CCJ can make the kind of order that you could get from the Guyana Appeal Court regarding direction, because the CCJ has already said it does not have the jurisdiction to deal with those matters, because your laws and constitution are very clear that electoral matters end with the appeal court. That's the court that you speak to if you are looking for direction of that nature. So it basically means that they have done all that they can in expressing a view regarding what they think should happen in a broader sense, and then dealing with the matter of a report that was on the table that was made pursuant to what they thought was an illegal act in terms of the jurisdictional issue, and they were able to dismiss that and put you back to that point. So that's my thing on the CCJ. The second point is that you guys know Granger better than me, right? I get the sense that Granger is a reluctant politician, and I have always gotten the impression that Granger is not, he's not a leader, he's a tool, right? when they were looking for a leader, when Corbyn had reached his time and he had ended, and they were looking for a leader, in my humble opinion, Granger was an unlikely choice. And I can tell you that certainly the polling that I did, Granger's name did not appear as an option that people were considering, because he is not really seen as being someone who is a leader. He has several attributes. And one of the attributes is that he appears to be somebody who is honest. And people felt that that would be a good thing for the APNU AFC to stand behind, because he was someone that could put everyone together, because he had this honesty that was an appearance. I mean, I know that there's some concern now about whether that's the case or not, but that is the appearance that was projected. That's the reason why he's president. Granger is not really a leader that leads on the basis of charisma and that kind of thing. So he's a tool. I think the challenge is that we assume that by speaking to Granger and getting a commitment from Granger, that we have spoken to the right person. And I think the problem is that he's not the right person to speak to. Granger's strings are being pulled. And as I said earlier, he's obviously reading a script that is being handed to him by someone. The question then is to find out who these people are that are pulling these strings, who these people are that are handing the script. And then these are the people with whom one has to negotiate, because you're not going to get a lot out of Granger, because I don't really believe that he's in control of what is going on. And quite frankly, I think if he had his own way, he would have finished with this thing a long time ago and go back to whatever it is that he finds time to do it on a daily basis. So my sense is that there are two generals I'm seeing in this whole process, and the two generals, one's name is Mingo and the other one's name is Lowenfield. And when we started to hear these bogus numbers being called out, as I said, that was when this coup started, and ultimately it has culminated. Initially, there was a belief that Lowenfield was the Mingo was the bad guy and Lowenfield was the good guy. We're now realizing that clearly there was some level of collusion, because both of them seem to be going down this road and they're galloping ahead in that regard. The language I'm hearing from everyone in Guyana who is on the ground, who is not associated with APNU AFC, is that you guys want to lock up these two individuals. And my sense is that they understand that that is a distinct possibility. And indeed, there's every likelihood that it is a change of government. The first two people that are going you're going to lock up is the two of them. And you've already started criminal proceedings against one of them, so it wouldn't be surprising. Is that not the basis of a negotiating position? Because if they are of the opinion that they're going to prison if this thing fails, they have nothing to lose, and they're going to continue trying, because you basically have told them, if this thing doesn't work out and it fails, you're going to prison. So it's against that background that I am talking about all of this and saying that I do feel that there is room for maneuver. When Abu Bakr held up the Red House in Trinidad and Tobago in 1990, he could have essentially killed everyone in there, and himself included. He had nothing to lose. He was offered an amnesty that automatically gave him something for which he could live, because it meant that him and his men could walk out and they would not face any criminal prosecution. They went for it, and it was a way to solve a problem. I am suggesting to you guys that we're at the stage now where this is perhaps the kind of conversation that we need to look at having, because everyone is determined to get these guys. And I am saying that for the time being, they have the upper hand, because everybody knows that what they're doing is wrong. You're not going to find any right-thinking person that is going to identify with them. And then the other point I wanted to make is that you have all of these APNU AFC supporters. You have intelligent senior counsel. You have intelligent people, attorneys at law, doctors, lawyers, accountants on the ground, in Guyana. And they are parroting this nonsense, because it is a situation where, and I was talking to a Guyanese friend of mine a few minutes ago about the program, and he was saying that, he didn't realize that Granger was able to inspire so much confidence. And I said, you really think that people are inspired by Granger? The narrative is clearly being articulated by some person or persons, and the narrative is handed to APNU AFC supporters, and they just repeat it. And you wonder sometimes if these guys really are listening to themselves, and the CCJ judgment is a perfect example where people are repeating that the CCJ has dismissed a report that the CCJ specifically said, I dismissed a procedure that the CCJ specifically said is what should be used to declare the results of the election. So I do feel that the supporters are in a situation now where whatever they are given They are. I mean, and you guys know, about this concept of drinking the Kool-Aid, and the Kool-Aid sharing out, and whoever is they're drinking it and they're just repeating it, and it doesn't matter whether it's illogical. I'm being told that I would not understand because I've never lived in Guyana. And if I had lived there, I would understand why they have to do what they have to do. While my sense is that we're talking about an election process where you count votes and you determine who is winner. Sorry, I realize that I've been talking too much.
Thanks, Peter. But
Yeah.
I want to pose a couple of, or point to a couple of things that you said, and I'll ask Mr. Ram to first respond to. You talk about negotiating, you talk about Granger is not in control, and that he's being handed a script. It therefore means those who are handing him the script know exactly what they're doing. And their intent is clearly what Mr. Nascimento said. That is to stay in power, and they cannot be trusted. So who are you going to negotiate with when Granger, you're saying Granger is not in control? But what I want to say to you before I ask Mr. Ram to come in is the fact that the sentiments on the ground are totally different. Guyanese, the majority of Guyanese are of the view that Granger is the intellectual author of all of this. Because if you look at Granger's term in office, he has always tried to separate himself from his government. So when the corruption and so on were going on, you never see Granger coming out saying anything. He always tried to separate the presidency from the government or the cabinet to some extent. Mr. Ram, I'll bring you in here.
Thanks. This business about Mingo, I think Mingo is outside the frame now. Mingo's count has been there. It's been given to Lowenfield. Whatever happens, it's a different story. I don't think there's any point of including Mingo in this. Yes, Lowenfield is obviously concerned about what he's done, but he's actually exacerbating the situation. He did not turn up to the meeting. This man is grossly irresponsible. So I'm surprised, and Peter, don't think you said something about enemy, not at all. I've got the greatest respect for you, sir. Let's not forget the role of Joseph Harmon. And he is Granger's sidekick. There's no question about it. They are like the Siamese twin. And when Harmon makes these tough statements, Granger doesn't try to soften them. He incorporates them into his own policies. So to suggest somehow that Granger is not part of this big vision. Let us remember what Granger said in Atlanta. Let us think how we won elections, how we kept elections, Peter. That's what he said. He won elections by manipulating a coalition, then manipulating votes. He talked about Burnham, and how they stayed in power by rigging elections. It is the most asinine thing for Granger to have said, but he said it. It's a matter of public record. So I can't in any way. Granger was a senior military officer. Part of his bitterness is that he was never made head of the GDF.
The PNC again.
Yes. But are you telling me that Granger is a coward? He's a puppet? Or is he a puppeteer?
The other one.
And there's nothing to suggest that Granger is not part and parcel of all of these efforts to rig these elections, to have an electoral coup. Look what he's done with the army. How else? What logical explanation can we have for Granger's conduct? So I don't believe that we can try to separate Granger from the rest. That would be naive. Granger is the architect, but he has played up all of this. Race, yes, we have a race problem. Anyone who denies that is not living the reality. But it's being exploited and exacerbated by the politicians. On the night of March the 5th, the people were wound up. And Granger said, look, y'all please go home. The election process is incomplete. We'll deal with it. And he had control. But what did he do? He wants to fire up the people because Granger has a vision of Guyana. The vision that his leader, his mentor, and his teacher, Forbes Burnham, designed but could not carry out because of his untimely death. That's what Granger is setting. He sees himself on a mission with a mandate. And unfortunately, it was such a crude, as Prime Minister Goling said, he's never seen a more transparent attempt at rigging elections. You just ignore all the statements of polls and you have a spreadsheet and say, these are the results. It can't work that way. We have to decide whether or not, we have to decide, we have to accept, and we have to behave. Whether we truly believe that we are a nation of law and order and the rule of law underpins our constitution. Whatever its faults, that's our sacred guiding principle.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. We have maybe about 12 minutes or so, and I wanted to address the issue that is before us now, and that is the U.S. Secretary of State today announced some amount of sanctions, visa restrictions for persons who are undermining the democratic process in Guyana. We have seen reports coming out where the UK is also considering similar actions, and we've also saw a statement from the Canadians basically saying that they will use every tool available to deal with those who undermine democracy and are attempting to steal an election in Guyana. I want to start with you, Peter. Again, you've been observing, have been monitoring and writing and doing polls on elections across the Caribbean. And I suspect you would have some idea of the implications of sanctions, whether at the personal level, and that is where it usually starts, then it tends to get to institutions and organizations in a country. Your thoughts on the actions taken by the U.S. State Department today and the threat, if you want to call it, by other major countries in the world to deal with those who are trying to hijack democracy in Guyana?
Yeah. No, I thought that the position that was taken by the Secretary of State in the U.S. was unfortunate. As much as I do not support the path that's being taken by the current government, I also think it's unfortunate when we have to get to the stage of talking sanctions. And I thought that that was an unfortunate position that they got to, but it wasn't surprising because ultimately we are at the stage now where the legitimate, straightforward legal mechanisms are breaking down. And I think that states are realizing that you have to become a bit more muscular with the regime. And that's exactly what the United States has done. And they are leading. And as you said, it's being considered by the UK and Canada. So it doesn't surprise me. And I don't think it surprises the APNU AFC. I think it's unfortunate that it has had to come to this because I really don't like when the United States takes a position against any Caribbean country. But it's not surprising. And I'll tell you, when I listened to Ralph Gonsalves, and I would say this for the purposes of the record, that I was under the impression that Ralph Gonsalves was actually a lot closer to Granger than he was to Jagdeo. I've never gotten the impression that Jagdeo was that close to any of the leaders that are being presented now as his friends. So, I mean, that's an issue that I find fascinating, that I'm hearing that these were buddies and they used to hang out and play dominoes together. That was not my understanding. But anyhow, when I listen to the language of Prime Minister Gonsalves, it's fairly clear to me that the Prime Minister Gonsalves isn't happy with the situation. How exactly is President Granger going to sit down in a CARICOM meeting, if he's allowed to, after this, and share, one could say, bread and wine with his brothers and sisters around the region? It's not going to work, right? The challenge that Guyana presents diplomatically is that you could easily suspend Guyana from CARICOM, and I suspect that that's what it's going to come to. But it's difficult to do that in light of the fact that the Secretariat is right there. But guess what? The Secretary General is being vilified, and President and Prime Minister Gonzalez is coming to the defense of the Secretary General because every single person that opposes this situation is being vilified. So he's being vilified along with Prime Minister Motley, along with everyone, all of them, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, principal of the University of the West Indies, vice chancellor, everybody is being vilified. And that's essentially the road that they're going down. So I do feel that diplomatic actions will become more and stronger. I've heard just today, Prime Minister Skerritt from Dominica, he has expressed his views. He wasn't part of it. And I think that the diplomatic calls will become louder and louder. And the reality is that from this point onward, Guyana will find it very, very difficult to operate. And you know, the painful part about it is that Guyana has been through a lot since the 1970s. You have discovered large quantities of oil, and oil is a commodity where it's not going to work if you are not able to get your resources out. And you can rest assured that until this issue is settled amicably, all of that money that Guyana is generating now from selling oil will be held in escrow. And you're not going to get your hands on it. And it will basically mean that all of the good things that you can do, the hospitals, the roads, the development that could have come will not come. And if you leave the situation as it is, so I think it was unfortunate. I do feel it was expected, and I think that this is the beginning of things to come. I have not seen an election in the Caribbean, and I was telling the group yesterday that I spoke to that the closest we came to this was in St. Kitts and Nevis in 2015, when the supervisor of elections stopped calling results during the course of the night because he was saying that he was uncomfortable for some reason. He was a Labour supporter, his party was losing, and he said he's not calling elections, and he left and he went home. Some of those same leaders that are being vilified today, at 4 o'clock in the morning, they got on the telephone and they called Denzel Douglas and they said, Dougie, you have to concede this election.
Mr. Chairman, I would like a few minutes before we end.
Sorry. Okay, all right. I've been speaking too much.
No, I'm about to bring you in here, Mr. Nascimento, because you didn't get to talk in the other room of questioning, because I wanted to hear your views with regards to the issue of sanctions and the implications for Guyana.
Well, let me begin by saying I find it unfortunate that Peter should feel that the United States are acting against Guyana. The United States are not acting against Guyana. They're acting on behalf of democracy. And what Peter needs to understand, and I don't think he does, I realize that Peter is well-intentioned, but he clearly misunderstands the gravamen of the situation in this country.
Yeah, Kurt, just for the record, though, I just want to say for the record that I know, but
we have 2 or 3 minutes. You will get a chance, Peter. You'll get a chance. I'll give you a chance. Go ahead, Mr. Nascimento. I'll give Peter a chance.
Thank you very much. What Peter has failed to understand is that David Granger is a general in an army. He's a military man. He's not this kind gentleman, confused leader that Peter seems to have a vision of it. He is a military man, and he commands a party that is intent on remaining in power. And the reason for sanctions is that without those sanctions, without the intervention of the international community in Guyana now, you can bet your bottom dollar that Granger and Harmon and the hierarchy within the PNC, all of whom I know very well indeed, because I come out of those ranks. I know them all. I know how they think, and I know how they act. And they have absolute criminal intent. Lowenfield and Mengo are not important people. They're tools. They're being used to impose a rig. It's that simple. They are not the ones that sanctions need to pay attention to, though they will, of course, be sanctioned. These sanctions have to begin with Granger himself, with his family, with Harman, with the hierarchy within the PNC. And they don't stop there, and they will not stop there. These sanctions will extend to the economic life of this country. It is most unfortunate. It is sad. It is desperate. I remain a citizen of this country. Sanctions will hurt me. They will hurt every Guyanese on whichever side of the fence we're on. But they are the only solution at this point in time to saving us from a military-backed and a military-driven dictatorship. That is what we're heading for without the support of the democratic countries of this world. That oil that is under the ground will remain there so long as Granger holds on to office. The money from it will remain in the Federal Bank of the US of A. This country trades, 90% of our trade is with the US of A. Our entire banking system is linked to the US of A. No government of any kind can survive in this country in confrontation with the US of A. I tell you that. And Granger well understands that. If you go back to 2015, Granger himself spoke about the damages of sanctions when it was contemplated then, but not to be imposed on him, to be imposed on the PPP. This country has reached a stage that is beyond recovery from the Granger determination to establish a military dictatorship without the full support and help and assistance of the international community. And that includes CARICOM.
I'll bring you in now, Mr. Ram. I'll give you a chance to or maybe I should just give you 2 minutes, a minute, Peter, you wanted to make a point because I want Mr. Ram to wrap. We're almost out of time. So I'll give you a chance to go quickly, Peter.
It's not even going to take 2 minutes. I just wanted to tell Kit that he should not think that I've said anything other than I thought it was unfortunate that it has come to this, which is ultimately what he said as well. I did not think it was unfortunate that they have imposed the sanctions. I think it is unfortunate that it has come to this point where they are forced to do so. And that's basically all I was saying. So I am not at odds with your position. So,
Mr. Ram.
You know, having been a victim of the United States invasion of Grenada in 1983, I have some personal views about these matters. Like Peter, I think it is unfortunate that Granger brought Guyana to this position. How many occasions, how many gentle hints, how many warnings did Granger not have? He and Harman practically dared not only the US, but the entire international community to take action. Look, we will do what we want. He brought the leaders from CARICOM to this country, and then he sat back at the least and allowed a candidate of his party to abort that process. Is this a man who you would call a leader? I don't particularly like sanctions. Sanctions always hit the poorest of the poor. It starts in one direction and it will get worse. Kit identified some of the possibilities. But look at what Granger has in fact done. Not only the sanctions, Today, Guyana is as isolated, as, is more isolated than it has ever been. Even when Burnham was rigging elections and the world knew it. But in that era, you had the Cold War, you had the third, the, the movement with Gandhi and the lot. And so it was a different era. Now, look what Granger has done to this country. The US, Canada, Britain, EU, the entire Caribbean, the OAS, today Brazil. Now, why would we have a giant on our border? And here is Granger playing the fool. There's stronger language one can use. So in many ways, Granger has in fact invited this on Guyana. Absolutely oblivious, mindless, careless of what the consequences are. We are in a struggle to ensure that we do not go down the dictatorial path. That's what we're fighting for, democracy here. These countries are, in fact, sadly, helping us. We did not want that kind of help. Maybe Granger can stop all of this by just saying, I concede. But no, this is part of Granger's game. But I enjoy sitting with you, Peter. And I don't think, as I said, I don't think you're an enemy. I think your points are very valid. But we have to see this. We know Granger. I was one of Granger's biggest supporters, chap. I have a television program. I had Granger on my program 8 times. I've been a big supporter of Granger. Disappointment is no longer a term you could use to describe Granger. He has betrayed democracy, he has betrayed the Constitution, he's betrayed his own followers, and he's leading them down the wrong path. I hope on this his birthday, it is not too late for him to see the light and to change course. Thanks.
Mr. Christopher, Mr. Peter Wickham and Mr. Kit Nascimento, I want to thank you, gentlemen, very much for joining me this evening. I know no love lost. It was a little bit of debate here and there, which is good for the program. It's good for the people to have varying views. But I think what I decided from all of this is that we all can agree that we are in a very, very peculiar position. And of course, as the title or the name of this program is, we're certainly at the crossroads where efforts are being made to deny the people a fundamental right, and that is to elect a government of their choice. But I believe, and like many other Guyanese, and I suspect my panel also believe, that democracy will prevail. This is not the 70s and the 80s. This is 2020. The people of Guyana and the people in the world over are wiser, and they believe that citizens of any country should have a right to choose their leaders. It's unfortunate, and I agree with you, gentlemen, it's unfortunate that we've reached this point where Mr. Granger, and he has to take the blame for this. Mr. Granger has brought sanctions to Guyana. It may be on specific officials of his regime. The point is that we've reached a stage where sanctions had to be imposed by a country which has been practically begging us to resolve this matter and say to Mr. Granger, you have lost the elections and you should concede. Now, no matter how much Mr. Granger tried to switch the narrative, or Mr. Harman, or any one of them, the fact of the matter is, and Kate, you alluded to it earlier, is that during the recount, we went into those boxes and we checked ballot for ballot. We know what exactly is in the boxes. That can be juxtaposed or can be put side by side with the statements of poll released by the People's Progressive Party. And those are statements of poll that the party received from GCOM. And the difference with the recount numbers and those statements of poll are nothing material to change the course of the elections. A 3, 4, 5 votes here and there because of vote that maybe was termed spoiled before is now accepted as a valid vote. APNU, AFC, they're in possession of those same statements of poll, and have not released them thus far. Nor has GCOM done that. I want to close in saying that Guyanese want this to come to an end. I wanted to address a couple of other issues, the way forward and so forth, but time did not permit us. But I think Guyanese want this to come to an end, and we all hope that this can come to an end very, very soon. Gentlemen, again, I want to thank you for joining me this evening. It was a pleasure. I'm hoping in the very near future, I can have this panel again. I love the debates here and there, and I hope we can have this again sometime in the future. Gentlemen, have a good rest of the evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you very much. Good night.
And thanks to our viewers. You too have a good rest of the evening. Bye for now.